She's one of Hollywood's most iconic actresses, but it's the role she played behind the scenes during the Holocaust, which is why we are discussing her today. A new book titled Dutch Girl, Audrey Hepburn and World War II details how Hepburn aided Dutch Jewish communities by volunteering for the resistance. And for more now, I'm joined on Skype by author of the book, Robert Matzen. Robert, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, first off, tell us how it was that Audrey helped Jewish people during World War II.
Well, Audrey herself talked about some of the resistance activities she did. And one of the things she did was to dance, and what she called underground performances, Zwarte Avonden, they called them, or black evenings. And what Audrey would do, because she was the most famous ballerina in Arnhem during the war, Arnhem in the Netherlands, was after she was forbidden by the Germans to dance anymore because she wouldn't join their union of artists, she did these performances that would raise money that went to Jews in hiding. And the town that she lived in, Velp, was it was a very wealthy town. And there were Jews, hundreds of Jews hiding in Velp alone. And of course, there were Jews hiding all over the Netherlands. But Velp in particular had this underground network of Jews, and Audrey's dancing helped raise money for them. And that's primarily the thing that she did that helped in that situation.
And Robert, I want to ask you about her mother. She has quite an admiration for Hitler to begin with. Now, what was it about Hitler that resonated so much with her?
Well, Ella von Heemstra, Audrey's mother, I would say was, if she was alive today, she would be called counterculture. You know, she was rebellious. And she, at that time that she met Hitler, she was about 35 years old. And still in that younger part of her life where she she wanted to go against anything her parents wanted her to do, basically. And Hitler at that time this is his rock star period. This is before he goes to war with anybody. She meets him in his office in Munich and is just very taken with this man that has brought Germany back from depression. He's really the first world leader that brought his country back out of depression. And so there was a lot for her to like about Hitler. She was part of the white aristocracy in the Netherlands. She was closely allied with the white aristocracy in England. So, I mean, all of this came together, and she became what I call a lipstick Nazi, which is just, it's the fashion of 1935. That's what you did. You went to meet Hitler, and you toured Germany and the facilities there, everything that was coming back from the war. That's what she did.
But her admiration for Hitler didn't last, and she ended up completely changing her feelings about him, correct?
Ella's feelings about Hitler changed in 1942 at a very particular time, which is covered in detail in the book, and that's when a family member was executed by the Nazi occupying forces, and that changed everything for the family. So suddenly Ella and Audrey moved into their family home, which is in Velp. They band together with Audrey's aunt, Meja, who was the husband of the man who was executed, and that draws them into the resistance network. And Ella's views change so dramatically that she goes from being suspected by the resistance of being Gestapo, as firmly ensconced with the Nazis. She becomes trusted by the resistance, and suddenly Audrey is then trusted too, and that's how Audrey gets drawn into the resistance movement as well.
Now, just on that, Audrey turned down several roles in films relating to the Holocaust, assuming this had to do with her past, most notably the role of Anne Frank. Now, why did she turn down these roles?
So Audrey had two very personal experiences in Hollywood with her World War II years, like colliding with her Hollywood career. And the first of those was when she was offered the role of Anne Frank in Diary of Anne Frank. And she had had a very personal sort of soul sister relationship with Anne Frank, in that she was one of the first people to read Anne's diary before it was even published in the Netherlands. She was living in this house in Amsterdam after the war, and another occupant of the house was the editor who was working on what was then called Het Achterhuis, which was Anne's original title for her own diary. And Audrey read that, and she said it devastated her because it was such an experience similar to what she had lived through in the war, where she'd spent large portions of the war in hiding. She spent portions of the war in her basement, in her cellar, the family cellar, because the shelling was so intense in her case. It was so similar. They were 1 month apart in age, basically, and they lived 100 kilometers apart. Audrey was in Arnhem, and Anne Frank was in Amsterdam. They experienced the same war. And so the final similarity was that the Green Police arrested both of them. And in Audrey's case, she managed to escape. And I believe that she had something like survivor's guilt because she lived through the war and Anne didn't. And so she's offered this role that she can't take. And it's heartbreaking for her because she's offered the role by Anne Frank's father, who was the only family member to survive the war. And so Audrey goes to Switzerland, spends time with the Franks, Otto and his second wife, Elfrieda. But she can't take the part because it's too personal to her. She can't take money for playing this person, and she has to tell him no. The second thing was she was offered the role of Kate ter Horst in A Bridge Too Far. Kate ter Horst was a Dutch woman who took British soldiers into her home. It became a field hospital. And so Audrey had lived through the Battle of Arnhem, which is what A Bridge Too Far is about. And she told the producers of that she could not make that because she had lived the war once. She didn't want to live it again.
And so how would you say the Holocaust affected Audrey personally? What impacts did it have on her life?
Yeah, the war changed everything for Audrey and made her the person that she became. And that was, many people will go through a war and they will be changed in a negative way. She took all of the negative experiences of the war and she turned them into positives because she understood what war did to children and young people. I talked to children in the Netherlands who she had helped after their parents were killed, say, who were starving. She nursed children who had been starving. So she took those experiences, and that became UNICEF for her. That became a way for her to help the world. And above all else, I've become an admirer of Audrey's. I started out neutral. I'm now a great admirer for the way that she took all the negatives of the war and turned them into positive things to make the world a better place. And her son talks about that too. He helped me on the book, her son Luca Dotti, that his mother always wanted to teach lessons about the war and what you take from that to make the world better.
Now, why is it that this side of Audrey isn't widely known, her role and the support that she gave during the war?
Audrey was a very private person, and I think that she kept a lot of these things bottled up inside her. A lot of her wartime experiences, she had been taught, and she grew up believing you didn't talk about yourself. Her mother would tell her, you're not interesting. No one wants to hear about you. And so that was one reason that she kept a lot of her wartime experiences private. And another thing is that she always worried that her mother's secret was going to come out. She was deeply offended that her mother, Ella, had ever been a fan of Hitler and had ever, espoused Nazi philosophy. And she wanted, as much as she didn't like what her mother had done, she had this family honor to defend, and she wanted to protect her mother's privacy. And so that's another reason that she didn't talk about a lot of these things that happened to her in the war.
An incredible insight. Robert Matzen, author of Dutch Girl, Audrey Hepburn and World War II. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.